So, Ilakkiya, the question today is can boundaries never be broken? When is it okay to break them? What are your thoughts on breaking boundaries and how do you deal with them?
Yeah, so we set boundaries for a reason. They're meant to protect you or your well-being. It helps you do the work you want to without feeling burnt out or used, and it keeps you feeling good about yourself and others. So it's important that boundaries are there. But I guess there are situations in which boundaries should be flexible. I would say it's very context dependent on what the scenario is. So I would say that depending on the type of boundary, things like you can set boundaries for yourself too. Like I'm not going to watch YouTube after 11 o'clock. I am going to go to bed by 11. I'm not going to use my phone in bed. It's very situation specific, but some boundaries you probably shouldn't break. It's good for you. But other boundaries of maybe I'm never going to pick up a call from a certain person or those kind of boundaries I feel like are more dependent. I know that I've spoken to my mom on a lot of different topics, and sometimes there are some topics that we talk about that I've started to set a boundary for of I don't want to talk about these. They're not good for me to hear. There are things that you can talk to other people for. So that is a boundary that I've set, but it is something that I am very flexible with because depending on how I would like to talk to my mom or what's going on in her mind, I might let that boundary fall so
Okay.
that I can support my mom or talk to her. So I think there are some situations where if breaking the boundary is going to be more beneficial for you and the other person, and it's not going to be a detriment, then I think boundaries can be broken in those scenarios. And maybe better phrasing is you'll jump the boundary, like jumping the fence rather than breaking it all together because it's still there and it's still going to be there for other reasons. But for specific situations, open the fence, let someone through.
Okay, that's a really nice way to put it. And you're right. Every time we make a decision in life, we do a cost benefit analysis at some level, and there can be short-term costs and long-term costs to breaking boundaries. So each time you break a boundary, whether that's one set by you or set by someone else, you are eroding the norm to some extent. And that encourages others also to break the boundary. And there's issues with the system itself collapsing into anarchy if everybody thinks that it's okay to break boundaries. So there does have to be some deterrence, but does that mean that you have a completely inflexible system where no boundary can ever have exceptions? I don't think that's possible either, and it's just not humanly possible to have a perfect system. So it does require a context specific approach where you think about the consequences of breaking a particular boundary and then decide if the consequences of not breaking it are worse than the consequences of breaking it. And if it's someone else's boundary, then you're going to have to think about how it affects them. You would always have to consider the consequences for other people as well. A good example of this might be the prisoner's dilemma. I don't know if you're familiar with it. So basically, it's two people are held in prison and they're questioned. If they both confess, then they get 1 year in prison each. If both of them don't confess, they get 5 years in prison. If one of them confesses and the other doesn't, then the one who confesses goes free and the other one gets 20 years in prison. Now, you don't know how your partner is going to act. You still have to make the decision on whether you want to confess or not. In those kind of circumstances, you have to make estimates and account for what you think your partner might do and how your actions would affect your partner. So you might have an agreement between the two of you that you will never I mean, some kind of honor among thieves that you will not give each other away. So is that a boundary you want to violate in that circumstance? That requires a complex calculus, and that is how it is in most of these situations where you're considering whether you want to violate a boundary or not. It's not always clear that there's one good answer, and often you find that the consequences are not necessarily what you had anticipated them to be, and there's also second order and third order consequences that you could not have foreseen at the time when you're making the decision. You can only connect the dots looking backward. So that is the uncertainty that we always have to live with when deciding whether we want to violate boundaries or not. But I would not say that we should always respect boundaries, because that would mean that anybody can set any boundary, and it would constrain your freedom far too much. And not every boundary is ethical or just. So if an oppressive government decides to crack down on individual freedoms, then that is probably not a boundary that everybody should respect. It would require the people to stand up for their rights, so that the government chooses to withdraw its oppressive rules or whatever it is. So I mean, it's too complex for there to be a one-size-fit-all answer to say, no, you should never violate a boundary. It depends on whose boundary and how you think the consequences are going to be if you violate it. What do you think?
Definitely true. It is very situation specific as to whether it's a boundary worth crossing or not. So that kind of goes back to the conversation as well of what are unreasonable boundaries, and then leads to a new question of, do you need boundaries? Is it possible to, go about life and have a happy life? We talked about consequences, not hurting you or the other person when you break a boundary. Can you have a happy life, no harm to you or anyone else, without too many distinct specific boundaries?
Interesting. Yeah, we should talk about that perhaps in the next video.
It'll be a fun discussion. See you tomorrow.
Oh, you're still here? Well, thanks for getting to the end of the video. Hey, while you're still here, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to get new updates when we post videos. Also, make sure to check out these equally exciting videos as well. Have you pressed it yet? Come on, you have 5 seconds left. 3, 2, press it now.